Good morning. Um, Happy Mother's Day to everyone out there. One thing we all have in common, we all had mothers. Your mother may be living here on earth, your mother may be alive in heaven. Uh, her presence is still here with us because this physical world separates us from seeing into the spiritual world, but the spiritual world can see us. And so, uh, whether your mother is physically present with you right now, physically, or is in the heavenly with God, please know that that's not 100 million miles up. Heaven surrounds us. It surrounds us. God's presence surrounds us. So your mother is present here. And it's a wonderful day that we honor our mothers, but we should honor our mothers every day. Um, Today, I am starting the book of Numbers. My name is Douglas Griffin, and this is May 12th of 2024. We've been going through the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. Now we're in Numbers. These are the longest books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. We'll be able to go faster uh, as we go along, but these foundational scriptures, again, written through Moses, maybe some scribes wrote things down, but either way, these books are all written around the same time to explain to the children of Egypt how they got where they were. I tell people it's like if you woke up in the hospital one day, you woke up like, what am I doing here in the hospital? The first thing you would want to know an explanation. How did I get here? What happened? And then you want to know, well, the doctors would want to tell you, and here's the cure. Here's how we get you out of here. And so that's what God is doing through Moses. Here's how you got to Egypt. Book of Genesis. Book of Exodus is here's how we get you out of here. Leviticus, Numbers are, and this is how you stay healthy. And so in Leviticus, the book of Leviticus begins after they get to Mount Sinai. They leave Egypt and they go to Mount Sinai, which ironically is the same mountain, not ironically, it's all God's design, the same mountain where Moses saw the burning bush when God first spoke to him and said, I want you to go into Egypt and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. So eventually Pharaoh lets his people go. God brings him back to that same mountain that Moses knew. And they're going to be walking around the same wilderness that Moses wandered in for 40 years. When he left Egypt at the age of 40, because he had killed someone, he wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. So he knows this wilderness area very well. And at the age of 80, God sent him back to Egypt now to rescue his brothers, brings him to the mountain where he heard the voice of God. They're going to be wandering in the same wilderness area for 40 years until they're finally ready to go back to the promised land that they originally inhabited, that God originally gave to them. So, in the book of Leviticus, he brings them to the mountain. Moses goes up to the mountain to talk to God. He comes back down, and the children of Israel have already constructed an idol to go back. So, in Leviticus, God gives them instructions. Apparently, you think idols are real. Apparently, you want to go back to Egypt because you think the gods of Egypt are real, but they aren't real. I'm the only God, and this is how it's going to work with me. This is how you actually worship. I don't want you to adopt the practices of the Egyptians and the nations around you because they worship false gods and they worship them incorrectly. They just make up stuff. You don't have to do all the crazy things that the book of Leviticus prohibits. You don't have to do any of those things in order to worship me. This is how you worship me. And he explains what atonement is and explains what sin is. Because under Egyptian laws, Babylonian laws, all these different places they go to, sin is not this. You can disappoint a God, but it varies because the gods weren't real. Oh, you stubbed your toe. I'm going to send a drought. Oh, you wore blue. I'm going to send a drought. They would just make up arbitrary laws because they had no idea, because their gods weren't real. Because I'm a real God. There is such a thing as sin, but don't worry, I've given you a way to atone for it. And so the book of Leviticus, God is just laying out, hey, priests, when you minister to the people, this is how I want you to minister. These are the type of sacrifices and gifts I will accept in order to atone for your sin. Now, let's go. And so in Leviticus, they built a tabernacle. Immediately, the very next year that in year two, the beginning of year two, in March of year two, they left Egypt in March of year one. So, March of year two, they finished the tabernacle. And again, God tells them how to deal with it, how to come into God's presence, who can come into God's presence to worship Him. And now they're ready to go. Now that you're equipped, let's go. But before you go, let's number everybody. Let's account for everyone who's here to make sure we're all together. And God gives them a system, a way to account for each person so that they can all make sure they can all go together as a group and go back to the promised land. So I just want to begin Numbers chapter 1, verse 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tabernacle of meeting. So he's in the tabernacle of meeting, and it's called the tabernacle of meeting because God says, this is where I will meet with you in Exodus chapter 25, when they were first just coming out of Egypt. In Exodus chapter 25, verse 8, he says, let them make me a sanctuary, a home, a dwelling place, that I may dwell among them. Exodus chapter 25, verse 22, and there I will meet you, and I will speak with you from above the mercy seat. And it was like a king would sit on his seat, and people would be able to come for the king, and they'd bow down to the king, and they'd make the request known to the king. He says, make me a seat. But he calls it a mercy seat because inside were relics of their rebellion. Like one of those seats you can lift up. Stupid things come to mind, like a toilet seat. You can lift it up, you could lift it up. It's like a little coffin, and inside, he says, place inside the mercy seat in that area where you can look up, lift up, um, three items, and we'll get to it as the book of number goes. But I'm going to give my mercy to you. These are three relics of your rebellion against me. Put them in the mercy seat, and know that that's forgiven. And he says, between two cherubim. Now, up in heaven, he says, I sit in my throne, and there are two angels called cherubim who stand on either side of me. Create replicas of these angels so that you feel like you're approaching heaven. I'll come down and meet you and carve out two cherubim, which are on the ark of the testimony. Um, and uh, again, that is the inside the mercy seat is their testimony, which is what he calls the Ten Commandments. This is my testimony to you, where I'm witnessing to you that if you obey these laws, if you don't kill, steal, destroy, worship other gods, I will protect you. This is my testimony to you that this is how I will provide for your needs. As long as you stop killing each other, stealing from each other, I will protect you, provide for you. So that's my testimony to you. And that's your testimony to you, to me. That's your covenant with me. So I will meet with you, he says, about everything which I will give you in commandment to the children of Israel. So he's telling this to Moses. Everything I'm going to promise you, I will explain it all to you. I will meet with you, and I will give you everything that I command the children of Israel to do, and that I will give to them by my commandment. So it's an equal exchange. I'm just asking you to, basically, I'm just asking you to come and confess your sins and get atonement. That's all I really want from you. Well, I want you not to kill each other, but I will provide, I will protect you, I will bring you back safely to your land. So that's kind of our deal. Uh, and then that mercy seat is going to sit in this tent of meeting. It's called the tent of meeting. This is where God meets us. And they could visibly see God's presence come down, his glory come down like a cloud over the tent whenever God was there. It was their sign. We have God in us once you've invited Jesus into your heart. So we don't need a cloud to show up every time we want to talk to God. They didn't have God in them, they had God outside them. That's why later God tells through Jeremiah, through Ezekiel, I'm going to write my laws in your heart. I'm going to put a new heart in you so I can come and be in you. But for now, I'll be on the outside of you and I'll have to give my laws and commandments that way. So you'll see a visible cloud show up whenever I want to talk. So in Exodus chapter 40, verse 17, it says, and it came to pass in the first month of the second year. So the first month of the first year, that's when they leave Egypt, go to Mount Sinai. By the time of the first month of the second year, they finished constructing this tabernacle, this tent. He says, on the first day of the month that the tabernacle was raised up. So this is now the second month. In Numbers chapter 1, second part of verse 1 says, and on the first day of the second month, because they raised it up on the first month, and then Moses came down and took a month to read everything from Leviticus, hear all the laws regarding worship in this temple, not regarding everything that ever happens to you in life. People use Leviticus as though it's God's moral standard for your entire life. It's simply God's spiritual law for how to worship him, why we need to worship him, why we need to love our neighbor, because loving our neighbor is part of our worship to God, how we need to take care of our bodies so that we don't die. But he gives us law in Leviticus, and it takes a full month to anoint the priest and do all the things they have to do. So on the first day of the second month, in the second year, this is back to Numbers chapter 1, verse 1. After they had come out of the land of Egypt, God met them, saying, now take a census of all the congregation of the children of Egypt. I made that up. Take a census of all the congregation of the children of Israel by their families, by their fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male individually. So we want to know every single person that's here, that's made it this far, because every single person's responsible, and I am looking out for every single person. So you need to count every person and write everybody's names, and he gives them a way of dividing themselves up. Now, he had begun this census before they left. In Exodus chapter 30, verse 11, it says, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when you take the census of the children of Israel of their number, again, the book of Numbers, of their number, then every man shall give a ransom for himself to the Lord. And when you number them, that there may be no plague among them when you number them. So God again is teaching, because we wouldn't even give a ransom. Somebody kidnapped them? Well, sin has kidnapped them. But God is teaching the concept of sin. That doesn't change. Again, with the Egyptians, all the various Egyptians at that time, not today, but all the various nations around them who were inventing false gods, what was right or wrong changed every day because they had no idea. Well, why did it rain? Oh, you know why it rained? Because you stuck a shovel in the ground to the north and should have done to the south. Oh, okay. And then 2 days later, it rains again. Why did it rain? Well, it rained because you, and they would just make things up because they never knew why things happened. And so there was no fixed idea about what was right and what was wrong. It just whatever the local priest said that day. Well, it's wrong. You all wore too much fur. That's why it was, So they just kind of like people do today, just make up sin. But God wanted to say, here's some specific things. There is really a thing called sin. The good news is I've made atonement for it. Here are the sins that I want you to know about because they will affect your worship of me. They will affect how you treat one another and how you treat yourself. So these I want you to know about. But this is not covering every sentence you're ever going to do. I want you to know about these because they're going to affect your worship. And I want you to understand the concept of sin that will prevent you from being in my presence. So there's a price that can be paid in order to get back into my presence. I want everybody to understand that there's a way, and it's the same for all of us. In order to teach, God's trying to teach that everybody's sin. That's why count every single person, and then every single person has to pay this ransom so that we can understand that everybody has sinned. All souls are of equal value to God. All sins are of equal weight. So I'm of the same value on my meager salary living in my apartment as someone who owns 5 mansions. We're the same value to God, and our sins are equal. All sins are of equal weight. There's not, ooh, that one is really, oh, that's a big sin. That's a little sin. All sins are of equal weight, and the atonement is the same for all. So there's a specific ransom price that everybody had to pay because he's going to get this concept to them that every time you sin, there's uh, a wage that happens, a wage garnishment that has to be paid. Um, so in Exodus chapter 30, this is before they ever left. Verse 13, he says, "This is what everyone among those who are numbered shall give, half a shekel." So it wasn't like it was some big price. Half a shekel, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. Now, a shekel is was worth 20 gerahs, which means nothing to us, but it wasn't, it's $50 or something. It was like nothing. Uh, the half shekel should be an offering to the Lord. Everyone included among those who are numbered from 20 years old and above shall give an offering to the Lord. Everyone. Now they're saying, well, little kids, you don't have a shekel, so don't worry about it. But once you become 20, then you pay this. Verse 15 says, the rich shall not give more and the poor shall not give less than half a shekel. Just because you make more money or you make less money, it's the same for everybody because it's not about you. God's saying that it's the same price. Same price that has to be paid. Your life is not more valuable because you have 5 important jobs. Your life is not less valuable because you don't even have a home. In God's eye, you all have the same value. Your life has the same value. Your sin weighs the same, and the atonement is the same for everyone. So the rich shall not give more, and the poor shall not give less than half a shekel. And when you give an offering to the Lord to make atonement for yourselves. Verse 16 of Exodus 30 said, "And you shall take the atonement money of the children of Israel and shall appoint it for the service of the tabernacle of meeting." So all this half a shekel that you're collecting from every single person, you're going to give it for the sanctuary that you're going to build to me. Because he's saying this before they've ever left Egypt. Now they finally built it, and God's now collecting that to make sure they've collected it. But he told them about this half shekel before they ever left. "You shall appoint it for the service of the tabernacle meeting, that it may be a memorial for the children of Israel before the Lord to make atonement for yourself." So you're just going to give it to the church. It doesn't go to Moses. He's not rich off of it. And it's going to help build this huge sanctuary. Now, he says to them, take a census of all the congregation. And he told them how to take the census and how to account for it. You write everybody's name down, and then, yes, I paid my half shekel. Yes, I paid my half shekel. Yes, I paid my half shekel. Interestingly enough, David got in trouble for taking a census. Like, are we supposed to count people? Sometimes yes and sometimes no. It depends on your motive. All sin depends on why you did it. That's why the Bible keeps telling us God looks at the heart, God looks at the heart, God looks at the heart. It's not the action. Because we want to point to an action and say, that is a sin. No, it depends on why you did it. God's asking for a census here. In 1 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 1, when David took a census, it says, "Now Satan stood up against Israel and moved David to number Israel." Now, in the book of Numbers, that's all they're doing is numbering. There's a whole book called Numbers. So numbering people wasn't a sin then. Why is it a sin when David did it? Second Samuel. Now again, Chronicles and Samuel. First, Second Chronicles, First, Second Samuel tell the same story. They cover the same period in David's life. They're just told by two. They're recorded by two different people, so they have a different perspective. It says in First Chronicles, it says Satan stood up against Israel and moved David to number Israel. That means Satan got in David's head. Here's how it says about in Second Samuel chapter 24, verse 1. It says, again, the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel. Well, what had Israel done? This is 200 years after they've gone into the promised land. That's when it took 200 years before David was king. They had conquered a lot of nations. They had gone back into the promised land and done at God's motivation, provocation. They'd conquered this nation and that nation and this nation. They had made friends with this one, made friends with that one, and they had built this kingdom, and they're feeling pretty good about themselves. Like, we're really hot stuff. We're incredible. And they wanted to number people. They started worrying about how strong and big they were compared to other nations. And God never wanted them to think that way. God always wanted them to think, you're strong and powerful because I'm fighting your battles for you. You're not strong and powerful because you have any power in yourself. But that's how they had begun to feel. Like, we are incredible. Look at all these victories. And that happens. That's God sometimes blesses us, and we forget who is the one that gave us the power to get wealth. That's why the scripture says it is God that gives you power to give wealth. He's reminding you who it was that gave you power. Some people quote that scripture and says, "Oh, God gives me the power to give wealth. I can't, so I'm going to go out and become a millionaire because God's given me the power to give wealth." And really, that verse was said for the opposite reason. Once you have your wealth, remember that it was God who gave you the power to give that wealth. Just don't start trusting in yourself and your own wisdom and your own power and your own might. But that's what Israel had begun to do. So it was again the anger of the Lord was aroused against ignorant. Help me. Again, the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel in 2 Samuel chapter 24. So when God sees something in your heart, he will remove his hand and allow that thing that's in your heart to manifest. So if you have all this anger in your heart, perhaps you'll start having more arguments with people. Maybe it was God that was constantly stopping you from getting in a fight with this person or a fight with that person. Maybe in your heart, you want to get drunk all the time. And if God was holding you back, but he sees that, so he'll remove his hand so that you can go ahead and get drunk all the time, so that you can find out for yourself what was really in your heart, so that other people can see it. God sometimes wants to let you know, here's what's in your heart so that you can repent of it. So he'll allow things to happen. So here's what it says. The anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel, and he moved David against Israel. It said he moved David against them. No, he moved in a way that it became clear to all that what they were really thinking. And so they were so consumed with numbers. Even though there was a book called Numbers, they became consumed with numbers, not for God's reason. So everything they're doing in the book of Numbers, they're doing it for God's reasoning. Now they're doing it, they're numbering themselves. They want to know how strong they are so that they can, well, we should conquer these people because there's more of them than we should conquer that. There's 50,000 of us, there's only 100 of them. Let's go attack. And they were just wanting to attack people because they could. Some people are that way. They're bullies. Oh, I'm bigger than you. I'm going to attack you. I have more money than you. I'm going to take what little money you have. I'm faster than you. I'm going to zoom in front of you in line, little crippled woman, because I'm better than you, and I'm going to get that stuff that you can't get. And they take advantage of those that are less advantaged. And that's how where Israel was. They were ready to start taking advantage of all these nations. So it says he moved David against them. David provoked them. God said, okay, I'm going to let off. And then once I do that, that's going to move you. I see like water pressing against a dam, just pressing. The water wants to press. And so you lift the dam out of the way and the water whoosh, knocks everything. knocks everything down in its path, you could have said, well, you released the water that knocked everything down, and you say, but in reality, you simply just took the thing that was holding the water back, and now the water's doing what it's been trying to do all along. The dam was the thing holding the water back. Once it's removed, the water now does what it's trying to do. So you could, yeah, I did it. I removed that dam. So I guess you could say that I moved that water, but in reality, I just simply moved the thing that was holding it back. And that's how they were looking at this. So David, in verse 2 of 2 Samuel chapter 24, it says, so the king says to Joab, the commander of his army who was with him, now go throughout all the tribes of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, and count the people. Again, in the book of Numbers, God said, count the people. That's because he wanted each person to be accounted for, each person to know they were valuable, each person to know that there was a half a shekel, you know, however much it was. I forget how much a shekel was, but a half shekel was like nothing. That they paid, and now their life has been ransomed back. He wanted everybody to feel that they were connected, not just Moses, everybody. That's why I want you to number the people so they all feel accounted for and seen. That's not why David was counting the people 200 years later. So again, it's the reason for the action, it's never the action. So he says, count the people that I may know the number of the people. In verse 3 it says, and Joab said to the king, now may the Lord your God add to the people 100 times more than they are. I mean, I hope God really multiplies us, and may the eyes of my Lord the king see it. I hope that I hope God just keeps multiplying this nation. He says, but why does my Lord the king desire this thing? Because he knew it was wrong. Like, why are you trying to count all the people? And that was David's opportunity to stop. Well, you know what? I do have the wrong motive for doing this. I really shouldn't be doing this. But verse 4 of 2 Samuel 24 says, nevertheless, the king's word prevailed against Joab, David the king, and against the captains of the army. All of them, the captains of the army, Joab, the head of his army, his general, all said to David, I don't think you should do this. But David's like, no, we're going to do this. We're going to count everybody so that we know we can beat and who we can't beat. That's not how you're supposed to calculate your battles. You go into your battles that God tells you to go into. Doesn't matter if there's 50 of you and one of them. If God says don't do it, you don't do it. So, but David was going to wanted to make decisions for himself. They were conquering people and just doing bad things. This is why David eventually ended up not being able to build the permanent temple, because the Bible says you're a man of war. You love conquering people. And I'm a God of peace. There's only certain things I'm doing because I have to do it. I'm not trying to conquer the whole world, but there's certain nations that are trying to destroy Israel, that it's important that you wipe them out, because they're going to try to destroy you, and hence they'll be destroying my plan for salvation for the whole world. So I can't allow them to wipe out the Jewish people. But you can't decide this nation, that nation, this nation, you're going to wipe them out. Oh, we're bigger than them. If I direct you to do it, yes. But now you're just going to start being a bully and bullying people. That's a no. So that's why David is numbering people, even though commanders say, don't do it. So nevertheless, the king's word prevailed against Joab and against the captains of the army. Therefore, Joab and the captains of the army went out from the presence of the king to count the people of Israel. So David would know exactly how many they were. So that David would know who he could conquer, who he could not, because David loved to go out and defeat people. Ever since he defeated Goliath, he's like, ooh, I like defeating people. Verse 10 of 2 Samuel 24 says, and David's heart condemned him after he had numbered the people. He realized, oh man, I messed up. So David said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly in what I have done. But now I pray, O Lord, take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have done very foolishly. He realizes his motive for wanting to count all the people, so that he could bully other nations, so that he could destroy them because he's able to. Well, there's only a few of them, and there's all this many of us, and we've got bigger bombs than them, and we've got mightier horses than them, and so we're just going to wipe them out. And there are times when God directs you to do that, and there are times when that's just your own imagination telling you to do it. So David realized he had sinned. But this very first time In the book of Numbers, chapter 1, that God is telling them to number the people, it is so that each man can be accounted for, so they can each feel seen and know that their specific sin has been atoned for. So everybody, there's a price for your sin. It's just half a shekel. Now you've all been ransomed. You're all in the family. So, Numbers chapter 1, verse 3. And from 20 years old and above, all who are able to go to war in Israel, everybody who's old enough, because you weren't allowed to, once you're 20, man, woman, didn't matter. You're all you're all part of God's army. It says, you and Aaron shall number them by their armies, and with you there shall be a man from every tribe, each one the head of his father's house. So he's going to say, now I'm going to tell you who's, because there's 12 tribes. I'm going to tell you who to put in charge of each tribe, and we're going to number them by your tribe. So he starts with, now Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, had 4 wives and 12 kids through these 4 wives. His first wife, Leah, he had 6 kids. Want to emphasize because it's taught the opposite, not on purpose, but it's just taught the opposite because we just don't read the whole Bible sometimes in context. The first wife, Leah, the one that David got tricked into, that he was so mad about. I didn't want to marry Leah. I wanted to marry Rachel, the one that he hated. That God wasn't fooled by that. That was not a mistake. Leah, from Leah, we get all the people that, all the tribes that God would eventually use to do his will. So God's not sitting there in heaven going, oh no, look what happened. He got tricked and he married Leah. Oh, Jacob wanted Rachel. If you, those of you who recall when we were teaching on Genesis, but God shut up Rachel's womb for years on purpose, kind of to show Jacob, Leah's the one for you. Leah had 6 kids. Finally, uh, well, in fact, Rachel was so upset that after kid number 4, that Rachel says, "Here, take my maid, Jacob, and you can have kids with her." So he has 2 more kids by Rachel's maid, Bilhah. Then Leah sees that, so she says, "Well, take my maid. You can have kids with her." So Jacob has 2 more kids by Zilpah, her maid. So now Jacob's got 10 kids. Finally, Rachel has her own 2 kids, Joseph and Benjamin. So there are 12 tribes, but there is acrimony between the tribes depending on whose mama you came from. Some of you can relate to that. So he says, here's how you're going to number the tribes. And God's very strategic. There's a reason he numbers them in a certain way. There's a reason he groups them a certain way. But he first names Leah's kids. So these are the names of the men who should stand with you. From Reuben, Reuben's the oldest son. Eliezer, son of Shedor, he's going to be the head of Reuben's tribe. From Simeon, that's the son number 2 of Leah, which is Shelumiel, the son of Zerubbabel. From Judah, Judah is not son number 3. He's actually son number 4. He skips son number 3, who's Levi, because Levi has been chosen and his descendants to be the priests. So they're going to be the ones collecting the shekels. So they don't get to be their separate army. They don't get to be a separate army. They are going to be inside the temple. They're going to be living around the temple. And so they're going to be numbered differently. So Judah, he is the third one, even though he was the fourth born son, is going to be Nashon, the son of Aminadab. Now, Nashon, I just want to prepare us because he's going to be an important figure as we go. From the tribe of Judah. From Judah, well, let me read the scriptures. So, how do we get Nashon? Nashon is Aaron's, remember, Aaron is Moses' brother. Nashon is Aaron's brother-in-law. Aaron's of the tribe of Levi. Nashon is of the tribe of Judah. And Aaron marries Nashon's sister. In Exodus chapter 6, verse 23, it says, Aaron took to himself Elisheba, whose daughter of Aminadab, sister of Nashon, took her as wife, and she bore him Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. We know that Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's first two oldest sons, are eventually going to be struck down by God in the book of Numbers. But he also had Eleazar and Ithamar, and they had kids. But Nahshon is now Aaron's brother-in-law because he's from the tribe of Judah. So Levi married someone from the tribe of Judah. Well, the woman would lose her identity, and now she identifies as a Levite. But Nahshon, who's from the tribe of Judah, he of course retains his identity because they counted it through the men at that time. From Nahshon, who do we get from Nahshon? In Matthew chapter 1, verse 3, he kind of gives that lineage. So Judah, that's Nahshon's from the tribe of Judah, and I'm just emphasizing this because Nahshon will become important later, and the tribe of Judah will become important later. So if you hear it 20 times, maybe we'll be able to keep up with all these different names. So Judah begot Perez and Zerah. They're twins. Those are his first two kids. He has them before they ever go to Israel to get bread from Joseph, their brother. Judah begets Perez and Zerah by Tamar. So remember that Tamar is Judah's daughter-in-law that he has sex with because he doesn't know that's his daughter-in-law. She disguises herself as a temple priestess, as a Kadeshah. And so he goes into the temple priestess, which was a thing that God later says, don't do that. But he doesn't know it's his daughter-in-law. They have two kids, Perez and Zerah. Perez, who's the younger of the twins, younger of the twins, but God is going to use Perez to bring us to Jesus ultimately. Perez begot Hezron, Hezron begot Ram, Ram begot Amminadab, and Abinadab begot Nahshon. So he says Nahshon, and so that it took all that time, 4 generations of people, all that happened in Egypt. While they were in Egypt for 200 years, Perez begot Hezron, Hezron begot Ram, Ram begot Amminadab, and Amminadab begot Nahshon. Now in this case, there were 5 generations because Judah got started so early having kids. In Moses' line, there were only 4 generations that happened in Egypt. So Nahshon begat Salmon, and Salmon begot Boaz. Salmon. Okay, Salmon begot Boaz by Rahab. So in the line of Judah, you got Tamar, who pretended to be a temple prostitute, and maybe 3 or 4 generations, you got Rahab. These are all part of Jesus' line. So Nahshon's son, Salmon, is going to go and be one of the spies that checks out Jericho once they make it into the promised land, falls in love with Rahab, marries her. Rahab begat Boaz, Boaz begat Obed through Ruth, the book of Ruth, the book of Ruth. Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David the king. So through Nahshon, we get David, and ultimately we get David, Solomon, etc., all the way down through Jesus. So Nahshon becomes an important figure. So he names these first through Reuben, his son, Simeon, who of the tribe of Simeon. Now, Reuben, Simeon, Judah, they've been dead for 200 years. But he's saying, representing the tribe of Reuben, Eleazar, representing the tribe of Simeon, Shelumiel, representing the tribe of Judah, Nahshon. Now, that's Judah's number 4. Now we go to son number 5 and 6. From Issachar is Nathaniel, son of Zuar. Nathaniel, you might recognize that name from the New Testament. And people would name, you can tell what family line somebody is from because they would name the person after their own ancestors. Saul of Tarsus, Saul who became Paul, Saul was named after King Saul. So you kind of trace people's line because they would just repeat the same, like you almost weren't allowed to name your kids anything from another family tree. That way they could keep track of who was who. So if you know Nathaniel was one of Jesus' disciples. In John chapter 1, verse 45, it says, now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. And Jesus' disciples all came from up north. 11 of his 12 disciples all came from Galilee, northern Israel. all except Judah. Judah came from the south. That's not a slur on the south. I'm saying he became because Jerusalem was in the south. But 11 of his disciples came from two specific tribes, Issachar and Zebulon, and those were children 5 and 6 of Leah. So Jesus comes through child number 4 of Leah, and all of Jesus' disciples came from sons 5 and 6. That's Issachar and Zebulon. So Issachar, he says, make Nathaniel in charge of the tribe of Issachar. So Philip was from the state of the city of Andrew and Peter. Andrew and Peter, Jesus' disciples. And Philip found Nathanael and said to him, we have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote. We have found him, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. And that meant Joseph of his daddy and mom, right? Not Joseph, one of the 12 sons, tribes of Israel. So Nathanael, you remember, goes to Jesus, and Jesus says, Nathanael, oh, I found someone of whom there's no guile. But he's named after his ancestor, Nathanael. And again, all the disciples were from sons 5 and 6, Leah's sons 5 and 6. God really does not use later on in history the two sons from Zilpah, the two sons from Bilhah, and for a while, he doesn't use the sons of Rachel. He uses Joseph at first, but even that dies out. The last 6 sons, you don't really hear much from those people. It's all Leah's kids, the one that Jacob despised. Oh, why you stuck me with Leah, and I can't believe it. But God had Leah's and her kids in his plan, even though Jacob was so intent on Rachel, and we're just like, yes, isn't it terrible? It's okay that Jacob despised Leah because that was a trick, but we all think we've been tricked. And God's saying, no, I let that happen in your life. I'm going to use it. I know it feels like a horrible thing in your life, but I saw it happening. I'm going to redeem it. I'm going to use it for my good. And we have to trust God in that. So in Numbers chapter 1, verse 9, from Zebulon, I want you to use Eliab, the son of Helon. So he's done 5 of Leah's 6 kids. Again, the 6th is Levi, and they're the ones taking the census. So he's saying, here's who's supposed to be in charge of these armies. And again, I'm going over this because these characters are going to be big in the book of Numbers as we read along. And it's just, the more I can explain it, then when you run into these people again, you go, oh, okay, that sounds familiar. Then he does the sons of Rachel. Because remember, Jacob married Leah first, and then finally, the next day, interestingly, the day after he married Leah, he was able to marry Rachel. But he still had to work 7 more years before that marriage became official. So Laban, Jacob's uncle, said, if you want to marry Rachel, my youngest daughter, you got to work for 7 years. So he works for 7 years, and then Laban tricks him that night, and he ends up going into Leah. And then once the next morning realizes, wait, this is Leah. He says, oh, yeah, I would never let you marry my youngest daughter first. That's not what we do. But if you do want the youngest, then I want you to work 7 more years. So he ends up working 14 years until his marriage to Rachel became official. Then he works 7 more years. He stays there 7 more years and has the rest of his sons and daughters. So Rachel's kids are next because that's who came next legally. So her kids were Joseph and Benjamin. So in Numbers chapter 1, verse 10, it says, from the sons of Joseph, I'm dividing Joseph into 2 tribes. Now, Jacob actually did that because he loved Rachel so much that he took the sons of Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim. And again, Manasseh is the older one, but God actually used Ephraim, the younger one. So because Levi was taken out, Joseph got 2 portions. So his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, each get their own army. So from the sons of Joseph, from Ephraim, I want Elishama, the son of Amihud, to be in charge. Now, Elishama, someone important comes from Elishama, someone who's not yet a big player. So from Judah, an important person came, and from Joseph's son Ephraim, an important person came. So let's trace Elishama. In 1 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 22, it says, Then Ephraim, their father, mourned many days, and his brethren came to comfort him. Why is Ephraim mourning? Because all of his sons were killed. All of his sons were killed because they went and stole cattle from somebody they shouldn't have been messing with, and that person showed up and killed them all. Ephraim's sons being right from Joseph, and in their minds, Joseph was the most important tribe because Joseph had been one of the, a viceroy in Egypt when they showed up there, and so they just really revered Joseph. But God had his eye on Judah, not on Joseph. But they're still thinking, we're important. We can just take what we want. So Joseph's son Ephraim, his sons went out. They stole from the wrong people. They were all killed. All of his sons were killed. So it says, Then Ephraim, their father, mourned many days, and his brethren came to comfort him. And when he went into his wife, she conceived and bore a son. And he called his name Beriah, which means tragedy, because tragedy had come upon his house. And now his daughter was Shira. Now here's something. Shira has got to be some super hero somewhere. I'm sure there's a Shira. I'm sure there's a cartoon about her, because she built Lower and Upper Beth Horon and Uzan Shira. She built 2 cities on her own. But Beriah had another son. His name was Rapha, was his son, as well as Resheph, Tilah his son, Techa his son, Ladan his son, Amachuda his son, and Elishama. So from Beriah, whose name means tragedy, he had a whole bunch of sons. And Elishama was his son. And then Nun was his son, N-U-N, and Joshua was his son. So from Ephraim, you finally get down to Joshua. It took all that time to get to Joshua. Joshua, the son of Nun. When I used to hear that as a kid, I thought it was N-O-N-E, like Nun. He's the son of Nun, like he came from nobody. But it was the son of Nun, N-U-N. Joshua, the son of Nun. So from Ephraim, we're eventually going to get Joshua, who's going to lead us into the wilderness. Into the promised land. Okay, so Joseph had 2 sons. He was given a double portion. In Numbers chapter 1, verse 10, it says, And from Manasseh, you have Gamaliel, the son of Pedahzur. So Gamaliel is another name we'd be familiar with. We know Gamaliel from the book of Acts. He was a Pharisee and a rabbi in the book of Acts. He's from the tribe of Joseph. In Acts chapter 5, verse 34, after Peter and John had gone to the temple to pray, after Jesus had been resurrected, and Peter and John, for the first time, they would go to the temple to pray, and a lame man was healed, and this caused a big stir, and it got the Pharisees all upset because Peter and John are preaching about Jesus, and how dare you, and they bring him in before the Pharisees, and you should stop preaching about Jesus. And they're threatening them. You stop preaching about Jesus. In Acts chapter 5, verse 34, it says, Then one in the council stood up, a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, held in respect by all the people. This is Paul's teacher. And he commanded them to put the apostles outside for a little while. Stop yelling at them. Put them outside. And he says to them, Men of Israel, take heed to yourselves what you intend to do regarding these men, because you're threatening these men. And he says, we don't really have to worry about this man. He's the famous one who says, if this is man-made, all this preaching about this Messiah, it's going to fade away. And in verse 39, he says, but if it is of God, you can't overthrow it. So you can try to threaten these men, but if this is the Messiah, this is the real Messiah, you can't overthrow it. If it's not the Messiah, it's going to fade away. It won't last. So if it is of God, you cannot overthrow it, lest you even be found to fight against God. So Gamaliel, he comes from the tribe of Joseph. It says from Benjamin, back to Numbers chapter 1, verse 11, I want your leader to be Abidan. Okay, so we've done Leah's kids, Rachel's kids. Now we've got Bilhah and Zilpah, their 2 maids. In Numbers chapter 1, verse 12, it says, from Dan, Achiezer, the son of Ammishaddai. Okay, from Asher. So Dan comes from Bilhah. Bilhah had another son who was Naphtali. But for some reason, which we'll get into as we go, God skips over to Asher, who is Zilpah's second son, and says Asher's going to be next in line. From him, Pagiel. Now he does Zilpah's other son, who is Gad. From Gad, uh, Elisaphat, the son of Duel, and from Naphtali, who is Bilhah's other son. And again, I can't remember all these names. So just know that he does Bilhah's two sons and Zilpah's two sons. He does them last. Um, Even though they were born before Joseph and Benjamin, they're really kids. Uh, anyway, he does them last. Okay, and he's going to group them according to. He's going to divide these 12 tribes up into four groups of three. You three stick together. You three stick together. You three stick together. You three stick. So you can keep track of each other. How he divides them up next week is going to affect the history of Israel and everything that happens in it. So he's just dividing them up. We just need to know that eventually Gad and Reuben don't like where they were placed in God's order, and they rebel. And when it's time to finally cross over the Jordan, Gad and Reuben and Manasseh say, we're not going because we're mad. So the way that God arranges things, there's a reason why he calls these people in certain orders, is because he can see ahead of time. You might get promoted for a job, or you don't get your promotion for the job. And why did I lose out on that job? But God sees way down the road something's going to happen that you don't know about. And sometimes he's protecting you from an evil. Sometimes we're disappointed the person we wanted to be elected or person we wanted to be appointed, or said, man, I wonder why that didn't happen. God knows way down the road what's going to happen. It reminds me of, I work for a director, a movie director, and we were going to produce a reality series. But there's a certain person we were going to work with, and we just had a bad feeling about it. And this person was on the ascendancy, like they're about to become big time. But we had a bad feeling about like something. So we canceled the whole deal. And a few months later, we read about that person getting arrested and taken off to jail. Like, ooh, God saved us. And so sometimes we don't know why we don't get something that we think we should get. But God knows why. And so God puts them all in a certain order because he sees what's going on. So in verse 17, it says, then Moses and Aaron took these men who had been mentioned by name, and they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the second month. And they recited their ancestry by families and by their fathers' houses according to the number of names from 20 years old and above, each one individually, as the Lord commanded Moses. So he numbered them in the wilderness of Sinai. Again, he's numbered them so everybody would feel accounted for. If we continue reading in verse 28, now the children of Reuben, and he tells exactly how many of them in verse 21, there's 46,000 people from the tribe of Reuben. In verse 22, it says, from children of Simeon, and in 23 it says there's 59,000 from the tribe of Simeon. From the children of Gad, and he names them third. It's interesting. Again, because Gad is part of the handmaid's kids, there's 45,000 of them in verse 25. In verse 26, it says from children of Judah. From verse 27, we find out that there are 74,000 of them. So the children of Judah has the largest tribe. This bugs Reuben to no end that Judah has a bigger tribe than his, because you're my little brother. Your stuff's not be bigger than mine. Your army shouldn't be bigger than mine. From the children of Issachar, there's 54,000. We find out in verse 29. From Zebulon, verse 30, turns out that there's 57,000. From the sons of Joseph. Now again, Joseph's sons were split up. From Ephraim, we find out in verse 33, there's 40,000. And from Manasseh, we find out in verse 34 and verse 35, it says there's 32,000. Had they been added together as one, there would be 72,000. It still would have been less than Judah. That's on purpose. God blessed Judah more. He wanted everybody to be looking at Judah and go, wow, God blessed Judah more than anybody else. Yes, pay attention to that. There's a reason for that. There's a way I want to use Judah. Verse 36, from the children of Benjamin. We find out in verse 37, there are only 35,000. They had the smallest tribe. Benjamin was the smallest tribe, and they stayed the smallest tribe. We will see later on why all of Benjamin was almost wiped out until there was only like 600 of them left. They started out with 35,000. At some point, they were wiped out by their own brothers and left to be 600. From the children of Dan, 62,000, we find out in verse 39. In verse 40, from Asher, 41,000. Verse 42, from Naphtali, 53,000, we find out in verse 43. So all who numbered of the children of Israel by their fathers' houses from 20 years old and above, this is verse 45, and all who were able to go to war in Israel, all who were numbered were 603,550. So altogether, God knows exactly to the man how many people are there. I want you to keep track of everybody. Everybody's got to pay a ransom. Everybody pays that half a shekel so that everybody knows that their sin, God sees their sin, God forgives their sin. You all have equal value. God does not value one tribe over the other. He does not value one person over the other. Your sins all have equal weight. There's no great sins and little sins. And know they're all forgiven by the same price. That's important. Verse 47 says, but the Levites were not numbered among their father's tribe, for the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, only the tribe of Levi you shall not number, nor take a census among them among the children of Israel, but you shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, over all its furnishings, over all things that belong to it. They shall carry the tabernacle and all its furnishings. So again, the tabernacle is a tent that's movable. You're going to build it here in the wilderness and carry it into the promised land, but only the Levites are supposed to touch it. They shall attend to it and camp around the tabernacle. Verse 51, and when the tabernacles go forward, the Levites shall take it down. When the tabernacles be set up, the Levites shall set it up. The outsider who comes near shall be put to death. Anybody else who touches anything in the tabernacle, the ark, the mercy seat, you'll be put to death. I've said this. I don't know why you won't believe me later on. I don't know why you're going to peek inside the thing and then get wiped out. I'm not clear on it because I'm saying this from a huge cloud with lightning and thunder. You hear my voice. It's all above the tabernacle. Why won't you believe me? Okay, fool around and find out, God is saying.
Yep.
So, verse 52, the children of Israel shall pitch their tents, everyone by his own camp, everybody by his own standard, according to their armies. I've divided you up a certain way specifically, but the Levites shall camp around the tabernacle of the testimony, that there may be no wrath on the congregation of the children of Israel. I'm going to move through these priests, through these ministers to tell you exactly what to do and what not to do. You need to listen to them so that there won't be any judgment coming on you. All you have to do is listen to them, do what they say, you're good. And the Levites shall keep charge of the tabernacle of the testimony. Final verse. Thus the children of Israel did. According to all that the Lord commanded Moses, so they did. For one whole day, they did exactly what God said. The book of Numbers is about how they just couldn't hold on to that. And sometimes we're good for a day, and then we can't hold on to it. Bless our hearts. Okay, so that opening chapter was a lot of information, but hopefully it will pay off as we read through the book of Numbers, the book that's getting them ready to go into the promised land. Thank you so much for listening in. I will be preaching at my church at 11:30, about an hour and a half. And so I'm inviting anyone, if you'd like to, I'm actually, there's only 3 of you who actually can stand to listen to everything and hear my voice that long. But I'm preaching from the book of 2 Samuel. Okay, so thank you so much. On Wednesdays, we're in the book of Luke. So we do the New Testament on Wednesdays, Old Testament on Sundays. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you soon. All right, bye-bye.